Good day, everyone. I'm Rian Hobson. I'm the author of my first book, The Ultimate Depression. And then I wrote the second book, which is actually a bit controversial, which is known as White Monopoly Capital. And, um, and also, I used the old South African flag. But there was actually reasons why I actually used the old South African flag. But with the whole uncertainty of today, and we don't know in which direction we are going with the country. I actually did some research. Now, the first thing that I normally do when I need to find information is just to go back in history, and then you will see actually what is actually going on. So that's why I use the South African flag or the old South African flag to go back into history and to go see what was the problems of what happened at that time, and are we basically sitting with the same problems of what we did, of what was done in the early 1900s, and then obviously it transpired again to today. So I just went back to as far as 1910. Yes, I went a bit further on, but I actually wrote the book from 1910 and then onwards. Now, basically, what I actually did or what I actually saw was in 1910 there was also a unity government, or as they call it, the 1910 Union government. Now, although there's a lot of things in the book that I explained, but I will now try to make it as much simple as possible. In 1910, there was one thing that actually struck me, and that for me actually pushed the whole thing to apartheid, and then actually it went on. Now, in 1910, what we need to understand um, is not that I'm trying to defend the old flag, but what I want to do, or what I did, I examine the facts and see if it's actually a resemblance of today. Now, in 1910, prior to 1910, there was a war which was known as the Anglo-Boer War, that started in the late 1800s. Now, in that war, which was a very gruesome battle, but what actually happened, the Afrikaners at that time, after the war, or when the war need to be finished actually, which the English did, they actually burned down the farms. And then they put the innocent women and children, then they put them in actually in concentration camps. Now, when they burned down the farms, there was about 4,000 farms that were burned down, and about 40 towns that were burned down. That was now just in the Transvaal region, because that basically they actually ended up, the Afrikaners ended up in Transvaal after the, as they call it, the Groot Trek. Now, they burned down all those farms. Now you must remember, the Afrikaner just knew how to farm. And at that time, in 1910, not the agriculture, the mining industry also started actually to move upwards. Now, there was an economic battle at that time between the agriculture and the industrial era. So, at that specific point in time, the farms were burned down. The Afrikaners didn't have any jobs, nothing at all. And now we have the industrial era that came in. Although they tried to help, which was Louis Botha at that time, they tried to help by using actually, as what I see today is basically the same as quotas, or what they did is reservation laws, or what they did at that time. So the reservation laws was that when the person was white or Afrikaner or white, he needs to get actually a good wage job, and he needs to be seen as a supervisor, or as basically as a supervisor, so a person with a higher ranking. Now, first of all, what we need to understand is that the Afrikaner did not know about mining. The English were the ones who were starting to enforce the industrial era. So now there was a switch basically of economic policies. From the agriculture, now we moved on to the industrial era. So the Afrikaners were, a lot of them actually went into the cities, which was where the mining is, and they needed now to compete with the African for jobs. Now, that is where the problem came in. One, the African was cheap labor because we didn't care. Our grandparents at that time did work very hard and at a low wage. And then the Afrikaner came, and then they actually said to him, like, listen, yeah, you are white, you will get your reservation, you will get a higher salary, or you will be supervisor. Then that is where the conflict started with what I actually saw. So what happened is that the low wages, you must now know, both of them, the African and the Afrikaner, didn't have skills in mining. But now you want to push someone above the other one just because of the color of his skin. So that is where they come up with the concept of reservation laws. Now that law did not work. It impoverished actually the white people, or specifically the Afrikaner. Now, the poor white problem did not come in the Depression. It started after actually the Anglo-Boer War. So what the governments at that time, which was now the government under Louis Botha and then Jan Smuts, and then you get actually General Hertzog. Now, they tried now to balance the whole story by getting now Afrikaners into senior positions, but they didn't have the skills. So obviously the system will not work. So at the end, they tried now with the reservation laws. And that's what actually happened. They actually now created more poverty under the Afrikaner, because they didn't want the Afrikaner and the African to compete, which didn't make sense. But anyway, they tried to do it. Now, as time went on, which I explained in the book, now as time went on, you have the Louis Botha era, it stops, and then you have Jan Smuts with the same policy, and they gave also, how they call it, civilized wages. It was too expensive for the mining company because the mining companies just started. So it was too expensive for the mining company. So that's why they employed a lot of African workers rather instead. And then in the 1930s, that is where they actually made a study, or they conducted a study, which was the Carnegie Commission. And then they discovered, whoa, there's about 300,000 Afrikaners that were in extreme poverty. Now, but they didn't get jobs, the Afrikaner, because one, the wages were too high, and two, you can't just employ someone of the color of their skin. It doesn't work like that. So then they discovered in 1930 there was about 300,000 Afrikaners out of a population of about over 1 million, nearly 2 million people. Now, what I discovered, it can be higher. The 300,000 was a bit of an underestimation. I think it was far higher than that. Now, they tried now to force the system to employ these people into the Afrikaners, the poor Afrikaners, into the workforce. But their labor was too expensive. So that's why the rise of the state-owned enterprise, which is known today as the SOEs, came into effect. So the state now built all these companies, which is now ESCO, and all these, there was a lot of state-owned companies, to employ now the Afrikaner in. Now, for a lot of people, they think, actually, that's why I said white monopoly capital, the fallacies of our past. They think now holding the SOEs, they use the SOEs to employ now the poor Afrikaner. Now, the problem is there was also private sectors that came in. Still, you have the African that worked at cheap labor and also push high output out. Now, and at the same time, that is where we came to the point of Afrikaner, although I go more into the book. So when it went on, they created now the Bantu system so that the African don't get the education to get to higher management. So that's why they created the Bantu education system. So to suppress the African by not getting the high skills jobs, so that it is reserved for only for white people. At the end, which was basically funny, it led up to a shortage of workers, of skilled labor. Now, a lot of people said that also that the basically the reservation laws they benefit out of it, which was no. The problem is at the end, the apartheid system or the apartheid government, the national government at that time, were actually bankrupt. It was not sanctions that actually killed the apartheid system. It was actually the apartheid system itself that actually bankrupt themselves because they were too high in debt, because they needed to borrow money the whole time to build all these SOEs to get the poor white people to get to work. Now, at the end, that system bankrupted them because they used the SOEs actually to carry all these people, which is a very good example, it's a very good example of actually a welfare state. So the welfare state was carrying them, and that because of welfare, it imploded actually the whole entire system. It was not the sanctions of what we hear on the news and all this nonsense. It was not actually the sanctions. The party system was long time actually bankrupted or bankrupt before that system. Now, in South Africa today, we want to use exactly, or we already use exactly the same systems with the high SOEs, with the SOEs, get basically people that are not competent enough to do the job and just get a higher salary. That's why the system is imploding currently. That's why you get what I posted yesterday. You have a high rate of salaries that is paid out by these SOEs, and these companies are basically bankrupt. The state actually of South Africa currently is actually bankrupt. Now, a lot of people also said, but didn't the white people have competence to run South Africa? Well, if they had the competence, then first of all, they would have competed with the African worker, and secondly, they would have paid off their debt. So the answer is no. And that is why we use exactly the same system of what is done, and now we enforce it into today. And that's why we sit with the problem of a ruined economy, because exactly how the apartheid system ruined the economy, we actually use the same system today. Now, the other problem is what I have is the problem that I have the old flag on my book. The thing is, how do you explain something from our past and not using the old flag? The problem is, yes, there was heart and pain and all of those things that happened in the apartheid era. But what we need to do, we need to look through that flag and examine the problems, what was actually done there, so that we don't repeat the same problems of what the apartheid system do. And one was to suppress the other one to have prosperity for the other one, which did not work. It led to a catastrophe of problems, shortage of labor, high debt, fighting, and all of those things that happened in apartheid, killings, and all of those things that happened in apartheid. And so the problem is that you can't suppress one to benefit the others. It doesn't work like that. You need to have a collective. Let everybody compete based on their competency. Sorry, the word competency. So that it is in benefit of the economy and as the country. I just made a short video of it, um, just to explain why I have the old flag onto the book, and how did I get to the concept of white monopoly capital. And also to ban the old flag, it's absolutely wrong what we are doing. We can't throw away history. We need to go look at history. And it's difficult for me, even it was difficult for me to write the book, because I myself was indoctrinated with racism, white people this, white people that, blah, 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 blah. And when I actually wrote the book, I actually discovered of how racist I actually were towards white people. And the problem is, when you look at the whole concept together, you have to go through that pain and relive what is the whole story of the past, and basically get to the problem of what went wrong there, so that we don't repeat it. Basically, reservation laws that was done back then is basically like affirmative action today. No, exactly the same. That time they had civilized wages. Today we're sitting now with minimum wages. It's just the words change, but the concept is exactly the same. And basically it doesn't work. Although it's laws, it doesn't work. It just creates anarchy. And I hope we understand, basically with the book, that we understand the concept. It is not working. That's why we're sitting with these problems, what we have today. And I hope with the book, it can help actually South Africa, because our future is at jeopardy now. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse by the day. I hope, yeah, my book is on pre-order. People can pre-order the book. We only print out the limited pre-orders, most of the books, so which will be signed and delivered for a lot of people. The pre-orders are open. You're more than welcome to visit our website for the pre-orders, or you can just inquire us for the pre-orders, and we will definitely post the book for you. All the best, South Africa, and that was my whole reason of the white monopoly capital and the white flag that we have, that is on my book. I thank you.